Welcome. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. My name is Jonathan Foust, and I am looking forward to having the next little bit of time with you. A little bit different for this live stream. We're going to start off with a meditation, and then we have the lovely Tara Brach joining us for an interview. Tara Brach, if you may not know, has just come out with a book on trusting the gold. So we're going to have a little conversation around what it means to trust, what it means to distrust. And it's, I think it's going to be good. So I am coming from an undisclosed location, which looks kind of like a bomb shelter here, but it is actually the basement of a house on Cape Cod. So here we are. Before we begin, just a few thank yous. First of all, a big thank you to Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo for producing this evening. Thank you so much, you two. And a big thank you to our mindful movement teachers, to Rita and Anna and Lynn. If you're not familiar with mindful movement before this class at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, you can hop on a Zoom link and be guided skillfully through mindful movement to prepare yourself for a meditation. That class ends at 7:20. Giving you a little bit of time to transition before this meditation. And a big thank you to Ray Manioki and Tara Cassidy, who lead mindful dialogue after the talk. And this is a great opportunity to connect with like-minded people, to share about your practice, share about the talk, beautifully facilitated by these two. You can get the link for mindful movement and mindful dialogue on my Facebook page, or on my website. So please feel free to check that out. Also, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this event, as well as my good friends at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington in Arlington, Virginia, which has been the physical home for Monday night meditation, these long years, with the exception of the last year and a half, where we've been isolated. You can sign up for a mailing list, and this will give you updates on the upcoming talks, or if you like, a monthly newsletter, which will give you sort of a summary of the talks and some resources for your practice. And I will also inflict my latest photography on you. That too is on my website. And finally, if you would like to support this offering, this is all offered in the spirit of generosity, in the spirit of dana, which is one of the very first teachings from the Buddha, where he said, if you knew what I know about generosity, you would not fail to share. He went on to say that these teachings are considered priceless. Therefore, there should be no price. They should be offered freely. And they are, at least through this YouTube channel and this podcast. So if you feel inspired to help this roll along, thank you so much. You can make a donation through all the usual donation vehicles. And that information is also on my website, which is myname.com. That is jonathanfaust.com. Okay, all that being said, I think we are ready for meditation. You might like to reach your arms up overhead, stretch up to the left side, the right side, lift your chin up toward the ceiling, let out any sounds. Feel free to moan, shriek, whatever you want to do. You're muted. I'm not. And as you're ready, you can close your eyes. And let yourself begin to settle in. Sometimes I like just to sway. You can sway a little bit to the left and the right, kind of sense where the midline part is, a little forward and back. And let yourself begin this very gentle process of turning your awareness inward. At the very essence of this practice is a quality of effortlessness. There is this quality of attention that you can open to that is a quality of attention that has no preferences. It has no judgments of anything good or bad. It's just simply awake and aware. Can you imagine just for a moment relaxing back into this place of nothing to do, nowhere to go? You might slow down your breath And just notice the effect of slowing down, sensing the breath on the inside. You may notice how it automatically begins to call your attention inward. And you might explore as well, what would happen if you consciously relax on the out-breath? What if you soften on the breath flowing out? Allowing yourself to open to maybe the possibility of some pleasure in just arriving in presence. Imagine your forehead smooth. You might feel or imagine all the expression slowly and gently melting away from your face. The muscles around the eyes, the muscles along the cheeks, and in particular, a sense of softening and relaxing through your jaw. Could you let your jaw just hang loose, hanging from the skull? And can you feel the volume of your lips from the inside? Letting your tongue relax so fully that it fills your lower jaw. And relaxing the root of your tongue down deep into your throat. And sensing through the back of your head, in particular along the occipital ridge, right along the base of the skull, relaxing, softening, feeling. Imagining perhaps a sense of relaxation now flowing through the back of your neck. And as you feel or imagine the weight and the heaviness and the volume of your arms, imagine the weight of the arms hanging from your shoulders and the shoulders softening, falling away from your ears. And can you now sense from the inside your palms? Can you feel the volume of your thumbs? The volume of each of the fingers. Can you feel the space inside your throat? And the space inside your lungs? And can you feel the space between your navel and your spine? Could you soften and feel here? And the space between your left hip joint and your right hip joint. Noticing now, is it possible to relax through your lower back? relaxing down through the buttocks and, in particular, the floor of the pelvis. And feeling now the length and the volume and the weight of your legs from the hip joints and down through the knees. And the backs of the knees and the kneecaps. And the knees down through your ankles. And the tops of your feet and your toes. And sensing now from the inside the soles of the feet and the heels. And as you open your awareness to what it feels like on the inside, exploring the following question. What could relax or soften or let go right now? What could relax or soften or let go even more than that? And can you sense, while you are deeply relaxed inside, simultaneously there's a quality of alertness, a quality of attention, a quality of awareness? Relaxed and alert, you might now bring your attention to an anchor of your choosing. This anchor could be the movement of the breath on the inside, the belly or the nostrils, or a general sense of the body breathing. And for some, the breath is not so helpful, and you might explore either the sounds, the real-time sound vibrations as they're happening, or the felt sense in the palms. And whatever anchor you choose, breath, sound, feeling in the palms, let this be your doorway back to the here and now. And you may notice when the mind wanders, that moment of waking up, can that be a moment of appreciation? A moment of celebrating the awakening of awareness and re-arriving here now with breath, sound, or feeling. Where is the mind right now? If the mind has wandered, is it possible again to sense a quality of appreciation? And take some time to again just feel right here, right now. What could relax or soften right now? And in your own time, as you again just sense your anchor from the inside, how intimately can you feel the breath? Or be awake to the sounds? Or sense in the palms any pulse or tingling or vibration? Relaxed and alert, and receiving the moment as it is. When you relax inside, and when you soften, there can be this inward sense of receptivity. And you might just note now what it's like to receive the sounds as they're happening. Any sense of touch or pulse or tingling. Noting the kind of the visuals beyond your closed eyes, if your eyes are closed. And sensing this ground of relaxed, soft receptivity. And the awakening of feeling on more subtle and subtle levels. And you may notice as well this co-arising of the witness, of your capacity to observe without preference. simply awake, allowing, letting be. And you may notice this quality of being the open monitor of change, noticing the stream of sensations, of thoughts, of moods, of states, everything that is changing. And at the same time, perhaps this quality of unchanging awareness. You might find it helpful to perhaps narrow your attention to your anchor, or if you like, broadening and widening your attention to notice this field of change, this quality of deep allowing and letting be. What could relax or soften inside right now? Feel your face expressionless. Relax your tongue. And feel from the inside the volume of your lips. Arms are heavy. The heaviness of the arms inviting you into a deepening and deepening sense of relaxation. Sensing the belly, the lower back, and the buttocks, and the floor of the pelvis. And feel the volume and the weight of your legs. And the backs of the hands, the palms, thumbs, and fingers. And the tops of the feet and the toes, and the soles of the feet and the heels. What could relax or soften or let go inside right now? How intimately can you feel and experience your anchor from the inside? awake to everything that is changing right now. And you might, if it feels right for you, allow any sense of doing to fall away. Let the anchor fall away. Let any sense of concentration or willful attention, let it drop away. And sense this quality where you are deeply relaxed, at the same time alert, awake, spacious, and allowing. Sensing now both the sense of the body and sensations inside and the outward movement of the mind. And exploring now what could soften or let go. Or what could soften or let go even more. Noting this quality, this attunement to deep relaxation. At the same time, a quality of alertness. And you might now begin to lengthen and deepen your breath. Let your head drift a little bit to the left and to the right. Just sensing what has shifted, what has moved over this last period of time. If you like, you might reach your arms up overhead. Stretch up to the left side, the right side. Take your time for your transition. There's no hurry, there's no rush. And welcome back as we transition to this following interview. Well, this is a delight. Welcome. It's good to have you here. And I am totally delighted to have this conversation with my wonderful wife, Tara Brach. We met right after she finished her first book, Radical Acceptance. And since then, I have been privy to observe her in the birthing process of multiple other books, Radical Compassion, A True Refuge, and most recently, the book Trusting the Gold. So we have this opportunity to talk a little bit about a little bit about this book and what it means, and some really, really wonderful explorations I think you'll find interesting. So welcome, Tara. It's great to have this time with you. I guess the first question I have is, what instigated this one? You know, how did it come from an idea to something that drew your focus?
Well, in a way, this book was incredibly unintentional. I kind of backed into it. It was like this unintended pregnancy because my staff here, we were just collecting anecdotes and quotes and things that people had requested, and we thought we'd have an informal collection, but it grew into a book that Sounds True produced, and fantastic illustrator Vicky Alvarez kind of brought it to life with her. She's just she has beautiful illustrations. So yeah, that's how it came about. And as I was working on deepening the stories and putting it out, the theme became so clear that it all was really coming down to, what does it mean to trust our own goodness, and to see and trust the goodness in others, and really the beauty and goodness that lives through all of life. So that became a very real and compelling theme, especially given the times where mistrust rules. I mean, there's so much polarization and real violence in the way people regard others, that it just feels like one of the most important places for our attention.
You know, from my standpoint, it was just really interesting to watch. You know, from the outside, starting with, oh, here are a couple stories, and here, oh, here's an illustrator, and wouldn't this be kind of fun and easy? You know, and then it really turned into like a really, really deep dive into bringing these stories alive in a way that would be meaningful. So, the end result, are you happy with it?
I'm really happy with it. Yeah. I didn't expect it to be what it was. It came out to be this book that I like holding and that I find beauty in, and I keep wanting to give it away. I hope other people want to give it away, because well, the feedback I've gotten is that people find the stories really relatable too, and they just kind of help us remember what matters. So yeah, I'm actually really excited to have it out there.
You know, it's beautiful just to have it in hand. It's like, you know, it feels good in your hands. I love the cover. The cover. It's really, really nice. How do you imagine people using this book? Because this is different than what you've done in the past.
Exactly, it is. Where in the past, it's like you read a chapter and then the next chapter and the next chapter. And in this book, you can read it straight through, but I think most people are going to just kind of open it to something and hopefully find something that speaks to them in the moment. It's lighter reading in that sense. The stories are like a couple of pages long, so you can kind of dip in and out.
So the cover's got a nice gold quality to it, and the title is "Trusting the Gold." Um, what about the title? Obviously, there's a lot that comes with the title of the book. Anything you want to say about the kind of the essence of what that means to trust the gold?
Yeah, well, the image I use, which I share a lot, is from that statue, that clay plaster statue in Southeast Asia that people loved over the centuries, but it wasn't really attractive. And it turned out, and they found this out in the 1950s, that after a drought, there's some cracks, and they discovered it was actually solid gold Buddha. And I love that metaphor because I feel like we think of ourselves as our egos or our personalities or our coverings, and we get identified with that, and we forget the depth of our being, the mystery, the goodness, the love, the awareness. And when we're forgetting it in ourselves, we see others also as their covering. So um, there's a question that Einstein asked that I find just really a cool place to pay attention, which is, he says, the most important question that humanity can address is this universe and is this life and innately benevolent, friendly? And well, I remember I've given a number of talks on this, but in one of those talks about, that there's a basic goodness, a love and awareness that all of this universe springs forth from. And that's kind of what I was offering out. Um, my mother was with me. As you know, she came in and out of class a lot with me when she was living with us. And she was a Barnard philosophy major, and she loved to take issue with me. And so on the ride home, she said, well, what makes goodness more basic than badness? I mean, what about all the racism and the, capital punishment and wars? And, aren't we just as basically bad as we are good? And, and I completely acknowledged, the cruelty and horror of how we humans can manifest. And what I said to her was that there's no cognitive winner on that argument. Is there a basic goodness to life? I could just speak for myself, and I'm pretty pragmatic, which is that when I can see all in my personality and conditioning, all the tendencies towards, aggression and grasping and so on. But when I get quiet, when that all settles, like when the waves settle, what's there is a presence and a tenderness, and it feels more like home, more real, more true to what I am than any of the particular stories or conditioning that comes and goes. And so when I assume that is essence, when I assume that loving and that awareness is essence, and I feel it, and if it's in me because I belong to this earth, it's in you and it's in all beings. The way I live and the way I feel is much more free and loving. So it feels useful and helpful and true to me. And it's more of an invitation to just explore. Like when you experience yourself, do you experience a sense of a kind of essence that's loving and aware? And it's actually a question I'd ask you right now. Do you feel that sense of basic goodness?
First, I just want to say I so appreciate your mom's perspective on things. I'm just recalling how I think she did, almost every week-long retreat we offered. And she'd just sit there for 7 days in silence. And on the way home, she would always say, I'm not sure why I do these things. So,
Wait a second, but to her credit, she'd say that, but then she would always tell me, on some level, and this is especially she grew towards her death, I find a lot of peace when I just ride my breath. So, it was, she was both and.
Exactly. Well, it's such a clever and strong mind, and I think that's sort of the human conundrum is that we have this mind which is sort of set up to compare and judge and figure stuff out, and that's very identified as a separate self. And then underneath that, there's this possibility that you're speaking of some inherent sort of transcendent presence that is in its essence, as some form of benevolence or goodness, and is it possible to trust in that? And it certainly depends on which lens I look through. When I look through kind of the comparing mind, or I look through my identification as a separate being with people out to get me, it's impossible to access that sense. But I do know from myself that when I have transcendent moments, sometimes I describe them as like those moments when I'm without desire, when I'm not wanting anything to be different than how it is. Then then there is this sense of like the perfection of everything. Those are not permanent states. I have noticed. They're somewhat transient, but I do find for myself, just through the lens of my own practice, that those moments of of really, really deeply pausing and resting and presence, there is that sense of kind of the mystery and some form of benevolence. So I guess there's this, that essential question of, if we all have access to some inherent goodness, what is it that gets in the way? Like what would you say, just in your study of this topic, are like the main impediments to accessing trust?
Well, maybe instead of impediments to trust, it's natural to distrust. It's part of our survival equipment to distrust. And there's nothing wrong with distrusting. So we're going to get into, what do we really mean by trust? But from the point of view of the survival mind, let's say the squirrel that we watch that's fleeing from the fox, it's really good not to trust the fox and to be vigilant and to run away. So on that level, it's wise and intelligent to sense what's going to be a threat to us. So mistrust is natural. And every being that incarnates feels a sense of separation and has fears of being hurt by things and mistrusts where there might be some danger. So that's really just to get that mistrust is natural. It's part of our survival brain, and we all have wounds in our early childhood or wounds from our society that would deepen that mistrust, that would deepen that sense of that. I sometimes think of it as severed belonging, that we don't belong and there's something out there that's dangerous. And so we have to work with the places where there's mistrust. What I mean by mature trust is where even though there's danger, even though we can mistrust ourselves because we can say, well, I hurt other people, or whether we can mistrust another person, they could hurt me, we can still remember also, beyond those coverings that are reactive and potentially hurtful, there is a potential within us all to wake up loving and to wake up our awareness and move beyond hurting ourselves and each other. So trusting the gold is trusting that potential and calling it forward. But it doesn't mean that we put aside our distrust in terms of taking care of ourselves. So I like to make that distinction there. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, and I would certainly say that for myself and people that I've run across in this life, that we have our very unique and individual relationship to life and to the distrust, that we're shaped by our wounds. But maybe just to personalize it, how about you? Like, what would you say were the kind of the seeds of distrust, and how would you say that sense of distrust has matured or transformed in some way to more of a sense of like a more mature trust?
Yeah, well, like many of us, I've kind of done some exploring of my personal history to kind of sense, well, how did I get the way I am? And I'll share, I haven't shared this a whole lot, in my talks and so on, but my mom was alcoholic when I was young, and she was depressed and she was anxious, and we were really close. And she tells me this too, that I would try to make her feel better. And on some level, I just felt like her pain was my fault, and that it was up to me to try to help her, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't make her better. So I mistrusted myself in the sense of I'm needed and I'm failing somebody. And then my dad, attorney and out there, successful, achieving person, rewarded me when I was achieving. So I hitched my well-being, my lovability, my respectability to achieving in outer ways. So this is all like the coverings. And So there I was, not trusting myself because I was letting down and failing my mother, and not trusting myself because I could never be enough. Like, no matter how much I'd get rewarded. And they weren't punishing when I didn't do things well, but I got the message that, you know, try to be great, and feeling a sense of falling short, not enough. That was my self-mistrust. And of course, I didn't trust others to love me as I was, because I didn't feel lovable as I was. So that was kind of the makeup for me. I have many friends who have similar kind of things from childhood, and then add on what our society does. I mean, the most obvious example right now in this day and age is how, if you're a Black, Indigenous person of color, you not only do you get the family imprint, but you get the society constantly on some level saying inferior, not worthy. And so there's all these layers that happen to all of us. And then I'll go on to saying a bit about how I have climbed out of the messaging about not okay. But I'd be curious, just to bring you in here. How would you say your mistrust got fueled?
It's interesting. The interesting thing about the Enneagram, and for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a very, very powerful approach to looking at psychology and spirituality. That and I always like to say, when you're looking at the different classifications, it's you when you get a sinking feeling, like, oh my God, no, not this one. And mine is the one that basically is built around distrust. So distrust runs as a very core theme in my life. And I think it really has that, the roots, again, they go back to the really early conditioning, for me, and just that sense of like not belonging, of, feeling, unseen, unheard, all that stuff. But as much as I even kind of roll my eyes, just sort of sharing it, that it actually was a very, very deep formation for me, of constantly looking through that lens of self-protection, looking through that lens of, some degree of hypervigilance, and then setting me up for, for many ways, a kind of a lifetime of, as I look back, I think, how many years did I spend, if there was any possibility of getting attention or getting any kind of accolade, my immediate answer was, of course I'll do that. Really chasing that, that desire to kind of want to belong and so forth. And then, of course, at some point there's kind of a turning point or a crisis or an insight. And I remember for me, it was this one moment living in the ashram of just at the end of my rope of feeling just exhausted and overworked, and realizing how I was I just couldn't say no, because I was so addicted to thinking if I did more, then I could, then I'd be okay. And the crisis point for me showed up as, from now on, I'm going to be me until I'm fired. And there was something about that kind of gave me access to, like, wow, would it really be okay to be me? And I think the rest of my life has been exploring that. So it was a real
How soon did you get fired?
Well, the paradox is that I started speaking up, I started challenging, I started saying no, and the feedback from those around me was like, wow, how did you get plugged into 220 volts instead of the 60 volts you were operating on before? So I felt much more alive, much more engaged, paradoxically.
You got promoted.
That's the problem. That was actually the problem. But I only got promoted. I only took on the things that really truly lit me up, as opposed to sort of feeding that inherent sense of like the hungry ghost of just kind of needing to take on more to feel like I belonged. So.
Well, it's interesting because one of my major breakthroughs on the mistrust piece was also in ashram, in a spiritual community in my early 20s. Many spiritual communities have a kind of undertone of, we're trying to get more and more perfect, pure and so on. And in ours, it felt like it was like that. And so I remember at one point, it's just everything came crashing down, and it became so clear how impure I was. It was like, and so I remember being in a meeting in a group of women and confessing my impurity, how much I didn't trust myself, that I was, here I was teaching yoga, but I really, I had a vanity about my own capacities as a yogi, and I liked to show off, and I felt self-centered, and I felt like very far from having a pure kind of essence. And I have no idea how they responded. I think I was so caught in my shame, I couldn't even pay attention. But I remember when I went back to my room, it was like a total crash. I was just flooded with pain, about my badness. So this is like, I was hitting a bottom of self-mistrust, and just was weeping until finally something just noticed, wow, this is suffering. This hurts. Ouch. Feeling this bad about myself really hurts. And so it started getting toned by compassion. And there was more and more of this witness that was just realizing, wow, to be so mistrusting and harsh. And as I kept going, that grew. And so it really shifted from me being this bad, impure person, just down on myself, to a sense of, I'd been kind of was like this, to really kind of holding with tenderness this, sense of pain and so on. And then even that quieted down. And I had this realization that, yeah, there's conditioning playing out to be vain or to be selfish or whatever it was, or competitive. And yet this presence that was here, this tenderness, was more truth, was more the truth of who I am, more, it felt like home. And that felt like a passing condition. And there was something in that, Jonathan, where I just really rested in that. And I knew that would keep coming back in my life, and I knew it would disappear and I'd get filled with doubt again. But I knew that was the path, was to keep turning in that direction, to trusting that basic goodness, that awareness and tenderness that was arising. And I can say honestly that I've had, countless experiences since then of recontracting and in some way back in the patterning of not trusting or not liking myself. But each time that it was kind of doing rain, what I call rain, or bring mindfulness and compassion to what's there, it would start dissolving that sense of this small self, and I'd land up back in that field of compassion or care. That's, I feel like, really what we all are. That it's really what's under all of us, and the repeated rounds of it have been really what cultivates the trust. It's just I have to keep revisiting it over and over again, and unwinding things with mindfulness and compassion, and then realizing that identity that I was taking myself to be isn't who I am. It can't possibly grasp this mystery of presence that's here. So that's kind of been my process, and it continues now. But the difference between now and then is that I think of it as lag time. It's like when there's some contraction, some sense of badness or identity that's really tight, I notice it much more quickly, and it doesn't take much to have it kind of dissolves. It becomes more porous, so I can sense the gold shining through. So that's pretty much the process.
So there's something really paradoxical about, as we always joke, if you meditate, you feel better. You feel your sadness better, you feel your distrust better. That for both of us, living in ashrams and different ashrams, practicing intensively, that there's something very, very potent about how this practice of mindfulness, if you will, actually brings us more and more intimately to that edge where we can actually see the distrust. We can see what's between us and that kind of uh, inherent radiance, or that inherent goodness inside. So I guess the question is, as you've gone through your journey of remembering more and more that inherent sense of goodness, what about for people who've experienced trauma, like real intense fear and helplessness, who really feel, I think we all feel cut off at times. There's no question about that. But what about for people for whom it's a very deeply searing experience, that feeling of being cut off?
Yeah, the basic principle is that the more wounding that happens, the more distrust. And it makes a whole lot of sense. And when we have an experience of being um, cut off and powerless and totally out of control, it's so searing that, there's very little sense that there's anything safe in the world. And so it takes more conscious cultivation of resources to begin to calm the nervous system. And so that when we've been traumatized, we can get reintroduced to a space of calm where the waves aren't crashing around so much, and we can really sense a larger belonging. So it's the same pathway for all of us. We're all moving from a sense of separateness and the pain of separation to realizing our belonging. But because trauma is such a profound cutoff, it takes more resourcing. And the resourcing, when I work with people, I'll ask them a question, which is, even though you basically don't feel safe, what gives you even a taste of it, even a little bit of a sense of safety or feeling loving connection? And for some people, it's, that they have a friend or a parent or a grandparent that when they sense them and their love, they calm down some. And for some, it's, being outside and lying on the ground or leaning against a tree. And for some, it's a spiritual figure they bring to mind. But whatever it is that gives even a taste of safety, if we then revisit it again and again and take the time when we feel a bit calmer and more safe to actually get to know it, get familiar with it, just feel it as a felt sense, it actually creates new neural pathways in the brain. So we have easier access to feeling that sense of ease. We have more access to remembering what we can trust. And again, I think of it like the sun is always there, no matter how traumatized we are. But sometimes the banks of clouds are really thick. And so what thins them is these practices of resourcing, of remembering places and people and experiences of safety and love.
So it's all about remembering and finding that pathway back to remembering. And I would imagine that for some people, that what that really requires is calling on the resource of not just the meditation practice, but really a connection through others and through relationships has to be a big part of this.
It really does, because we get wounded in relationships, so we heal in relationships. So we're bringing those meditative qualities we're bringing mindfulness and compassion into the relational field. And for many of us, I know so many people that trust started reawakening by just a certain friend who really accepted us no matter how we were. It's like another person's mirroring of the gold. If somebody knows how to see our goodness and let us know it, that's the greatest gift that we can be given. So we do heal each other into trusting the gold, and that's really essential. And it's something that you and I can see in our own relationship, that part of the goodness of a close relationship is that everybody goes into periods of mistrust, and we all need each other. We need to be reminded by each other. And that's really the generosity of a relationship. We remind each other of goodness.
I think there's a strong tendency to feel like, this path of awakening is a solo journey. And in many ways it is. It's about, about that inner healing, our fundamental relationship with the universe. But it's so much more when we open it up into the relational field. And I know certainly, over the years of our relationship, it's almost been sometimes been a kind of a purgative process of just seeing my own patterns of distrust and bringing them into the relationship for them to be seen and felt and held, and ultimately just held in love. And I know we have this ongoing thing around whoever does the role reversal first wins, which is such a great, it just changes the frame in relationship. That is, that as soon as I can begin to sense the fear or the anxiety that you're bringing in, of how you're not trusting your life, or you're not trusting how we are in relationship, as soon as I can move into that, there's such a powerful process of feeling more whole. And in that same way for myself, when I can name a way that I'm holding back and a way that I'm holding myself separate, just naming it is powerful. But then actually having it received and feeling empathy is quite powerful.
Oh, yeah. I actually think of everything in terms of relationship, that we're in relationship with our inner life, and we're in relationship with each other, and we're in relationship with, the moon and the stars. It's everything's a web of relationship. And when there is conflict and when there's a sense of separation, often what we have to do, and I see this with you and me, is first go inward and hook up inwardly, because usually when we're in conflict, we're living in a smaller place within ourselves, so we have to come back to a little more wholeness inside us. And I'm thinking of, one of the biggest challenges I had in our relationship actually came not that long after we got married, because that's when I got sick. And I kind of spiraled into sickness pretty quickly. So I went from this robust person, and you and I loved going, hiking and boogie boarding and, kayaking and the whole thing. And I got so sick that I could barely do those things with you. And I remember getting increasingly depressed and kind of withdrawn from you, and your efforts to be helpful, I would just kind of like pull in more deeply, because I was so stuck, and not just feeling sick, but I realized that I was feeling a distance from you because I wasn't the partner you had married. I was no longer feeling fun. I just didn't feel like an attractive, fun, cool, neat person to be with. And I wasn't, in many ways. And so I really feared rejection. And I remember it kind of coming to a peak one day. I remember being out in our hammock and feeling, really distant from you and really contracted. And I did what I call the U-turn, whereas I turned the attention not from you, but back to, well, what's really going on inside me? And I got in touch with a feeling of kind of shame and unlovability, that really core feeling that I'm not going to be loved. And again, I did that same process I described before, and ouch, and I started bringing compassion to it and holding myself and really offering, just in that case, just feeling like I was just saying, okay, universe, okay, beloved, the sense of the, loving awareness in the universe just bathed me, because I really was feeling so cut off. And it really was restorative. I just felt more of a sense of being held by the universe and held by my own being. And I remember when I went to talk to you, that I was, because I had done that inward relating, I was able to be more real with you and name what I just said, that, you know, I was afraid, I really feared that, you know, you wouldn't want to be with me. And you were really amazing. I mean, you kind of mirrored back what I was, you said, you know, you heard me and you said what you were, I was, you let me know you understood, and you were incredibly unconditional in your care, which of course was really soothing. And you shared how powerless you were feeling in the face of, you know, me taking that dive, and the self-consciousness you felt when you tried to extend help, and your own vulnerability around it. And it was a deeply trust building for both of us. I felt like it brought us a lot closer because we both were very real with our vulnerability, and we could see the goodness that was there, you know, the tenderness towards each other. But I found again and again, and this is both with us and in so many relationships, that to deepen trust, we start with where we're not feeling trust and get real with it. The places that we feel reactive, hurt, angry. And that takes us kind of courage to feel not okay. But if we do that within ourselves, then we're able to bring it into the relational field in a way that's actually healing, so that both people can end up sensing both the conditioning, the waves on the surface, but also kind of that shared ocean of tenderness. So I kind of wanted to say that out loud because I haven't really shared so much our process.
You know, it's so interesting to me, you know, how we're both in our both individual worlds around the powerlessness we were feeling. You know, how powerless you were over just your medical condition, and how powerless I felt around being helpful and you know being in our marriage. And we had our individual, very private, internal, separate worlds around that. And I'm so struck by the two wings of the practice of, you know, like the courage to really see and name what's true, and for you to name it, in many ways really helped me to name it, and then to really move into that heart space that could hold all of that. It was so powerful. And so I'm struck at how.
It's true. I mean,
Go ahead.
it's, well, I was just thinking that that has been through our whole relationship. When we do that, and we, for those that are listening, we take you know, a couple of days a week, we kind of do check-ins, or we really see, is there anything between us and feeling loving and close? It's when we are courageous enough to identify, well, this is an edge and it doesn't feel good to bring it up. But when we do and we stay with it, it lands us up more with trust. I mean, that's what I find each time.
And as I have shared with our check-ins, and this has changed, but initially was, I knew they would be good for me. I knew I would be glad I would do them, but nothing was looking forward to those check-ins. And in the same way, I think it happens with our meditation practice. You know, it happens with, you know, with any practice where we're pausing and coming in contact with reality. We're not necessarily looking forward to it, but it can be so incredibly freeing. So we have just about maybe about 3 or 4 minutes left. Um, so when we're exploring this whole theme of trust, there's sort of our internal experience, you know, of really looking at all the conditioning that's created a sense of separation. And then there's this sense of how trust and distrust shows up in our most intimate relationships. And anything you might want to say about how do we apply it to the world? You know, this is such a challenging time in the world right now. How do we keep this practice alive? How do we cultivate more trust in a world that's filled with so much turmoil right now?
I think that's the most important question. And I see, you know, I see initiatives happening on the macro level, you know, where There's attempts to bring people of difference together, to have the kind of conversations. The real question is, what's it like being you? You know, where does it hurt? If we can start naming, naming what's going on for us and really imagining and sensing what it's like for others, that's the training. And it takes a real courage and willingness. So I feel like rather than talking on the macro level, if each of us in our own lives, wherever we feel distrust or that edge of aversion or difference, if we could both first make the U-turn and come within ourselves and bring presence and compassion to how it's coming up for us, and then try to ask that question, what are you going through? What's it like being you? What happens over time is that it doesn't make the other person, let's say they're a person that's actually causing harm, it doesn't make us put down our boundaries. We have what's called a strong back and a soft front. We see clearly with discriminating wisdom who's causing harm and how we need to protect ourselves. We have to have that strong back. But our hearts can still sense what another's going through, their vulnerability, their wounds. And underneath that, we can begin to see that just like us, people love love. People want to be free. You know, there's a quote I love from Thomas Merton that goes that life is this simple. We're living in a world that's absolutely transparent and the divine is shining through it all the time. This is not just a nice story or fable. It is true. And gradually, we really get it's not just a spiritual idea that the sacred is living through all of life. One of my practices is a kind of be walking and I'll see a tree and I'll just sense how the sentience and it's like the tree and I are loving each other, but the tree's love it's not as complex, but it's still life loving to live, you know, and I'll see a bird or I'll look at the puppy that I walk with all the time, Katie, or I'll look at you right now. And it's not just a nice story or a fable to see the consciousness shining through another person's eyes, to feel that heart cares just like this heart cares. It's a fundamental valuing of life. And when I'm sensing that, I can't feel alone. It's like we are all from that same shining gold. And I sometimes think if we could all be practicing to see that gold, we wouldn't harm. We'd know our essential belonging. We'd care for our earth, you know, it's our larger body. We'd sense the gold shining through the earth. We couldn't be cruel to animals. You know, we torture billions of animals a year as part of our habit of eating. We couldn't do it. We wouldn't have racial caste systems or sexual or caste systems or class caste systems, because all beings would deserve the same respect and care because we're all connected. You know, the gold is shining through us all. So it can sound idealistic. And that's why we need to keep coming down to just this moment right here as you're listening, as you're being, just sensing that within your own being, when you get quiet, there's an awareness and a tenderness. And your being's not different than other beings. It's in all of us. And even if it gets covered over, the most radical, powerful, beautiful thing you can do is to have the intention to trust it, to see it in yourself and others, because that really is what will heal our world.
To cultivate the intention to trust. That's beautiful, and probably a perfect time for us to kind of end. So juicy, what you just said, and you. Thank you so much.
Wow. Well, I have a question for you. Is this the first time we've ever done this? Didn't you trust me enough to do this kind of a co-sharing of a presentation like this?
I just think it's totally fun, and I look forward to more. And it's awfully strange to be sitting in one room knowing you're sitting in another room. So I trust I'll see you shortly.
Quite intimate to look at a screen, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for hosting this way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really good.